Hello everyone, welcome. Hello subscribers, hello followers. Yesterday I was listening to the Duran and they were talking about the problems with the Trump at the moment and what is happening in the courts and so on. The indictments, and then at the very end, very interesting as usual, at the end Alexander Mercouris says something. He says that the situation in America and what is happening in the law and just about everything else actually reminded him or brought him back, he is a historian, brought him back to that 1st century BC when Tiberius was eventually brought down, assassinated, and started the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire. After that, you would have dictators and so on. And he mentioned this person, Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus. And I got interested and I said, I have to read about this Tiberius, especially if the situation, the political situation, resembles in some sort of way the beginning of the fall of an empire and what is happening to the leaders and so on. I want to know more about it. So I went to my given the fall of the Roman Empire, and then I looked up some articles on internet, on the Encyclopedia Britannica, and we can still trust the the Britannica, right? I mean, we used to trust the BBC. I don't know, but this is yes, of course we can. So I'm going to share it with you because I'm assuming that not everybody is an expert on Roman history, the history of the Roman Empire. So let's see what you think of this. First of all, we have an empire which is declining. We have two main Roman families, politically powerful families, the Scipios and the Claudiuses, the Claudio family. Think of it as I go reading along this article, I have summarized it very much, but think of it of the same situation, two political parties, for example. He's going to refer to the landless peasants who are increasing in number, the poor. He's also going to talk about the independent landowning farmer peasants. In other words, not nobles, not the wealthy, not landless completely. So we could think of them as sort of the middle class kind of thing, okay, sort of in between. Problems in the Senate about trying to pass laws, doing this, doing that. Okay, so I think you will see I've seen the connection. And remember that famous sentence from Cicero: to know nothing of what happened before you were born is to remain forever a child. So, let me share with you what, in a very concise summary, what I learned about Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus. He had a brother also called, what was his first name? I forgot, but Sempronius Gracchus, also the surname. They're known in history as the two Gracchi, in the plural, Gracchus. Anyway, so Tiberius was born in 169 BC and died in 133 in Rome. Okay, he was a Roman tribune. What does that mean? The tribunes were really the commanders of the infantry, but they were seen as the leaders and protectors of the people, representing the people. He was to he got into trouble because of this, because he was trying to sponsor agrarian reforms in order to bring back to life, as it were, this class of independent farmers, the middle class, and eventually was to be assassinated in a riot sparked by his senatorial opponents. A little bit of who he was. He was born into an aristocratic family, let's say the wealthy, okay? And he was heir to certain political benefits. He had connections with both main families, with the other two leading families in Rome, with the Scipios through his mother Cornelia and so on, and through the Claudi through his wife and so on. So he was fine with both families, political parties, okay? But as a Roman aristocrat, okay, a member of the wealthy elite, nevertheless, he started to see fissures, problems in the empire. He began his, and this is what is going to cost him at the end his life. He was not a saint, by the way. He could wheel and deal and, do all kinds of things. But let me just give you a little bit of the history. He began his normal military career serving as a junior officer with distinction under one of the Scipios, okay, who had fought in the war with Carthage. And in due course, he was promoted to quaestor, which means a paymaster, with another consul when the empire was fighting a protracted colonial warfare in Spain. I thought, oh, okay, so this is interesting. And as I'm reading his history, I realized that, oh my gosh, I remember studying this as a child, because I didn't remember who said what or what had happened, but I remember this dramatic sentence that I learned as a child, 9 years old or whatever I was, in your history class, which said that and this was in Numancia, I think, and it said that some Spaniards had betrayed their leader who were fighting the Romans, betrayed him for money, and when they went to get their recompense, their money from the Romans said, and here comes the sentence, Rome does not pay traitors. I remember that, because it was, as I said, I didn't remember anything else, but I remember that sentence. Well, I think this is it, because it was this Scipio and probably Tiberius himself who got into this agreement. And then when they went to get paid, what the encyclopedia, the Britannica says, he says, there his personal integrity and family reputation enabled him to save the Roman army from total destruction at Numancia by an agreement with the Spanish tribesmen. I think this was it. But, and this is the problem, at the insistence of Scipio, the agreement was disavowed by the Senate at Rome. And this setback, I think it's this, that they didn't pay. This setback alienated Tiberius from the Scipios faction in the Senate, and drew him closer to the other faction, to his Claudian friends. To him, it was a matter of integrity, probably, that they should be paid or something. So although he was always in the middle kind of the two families belonging to both, he thought that this decision by Scipio was not right. So he moved more to the other side. His military experience had shown him very clearly the weakness of Rome at the time, because he felt that the dominance of Rome the empire had been stretched to the limit in order to maintain its hegemony, its dominance, its power over the whole of the Mediterranean world. While at the same time, and perhaps because of that, not the only reason, but certainly one of the reasons, the situation at home was becoming worse and worse. Let's say the economy beginning to contract all over the place. So the article says the primitive subsistence economy that in the past centuries had nourished a large population of poor peasants was being eroded by all these factors. Notably, the development of large states owned by magnates enriched in the imperialist wars and devoted to cash crops worked by slaves and day laborers. The landowning peasantry, let's say the middle class, who alone were thought to be useful for the military service, these were declining in numbers, while the landless citizenry were increasing. The middle class was disappearing, the poor were increasing. Now, Tiberius sought a solution to this problem, the manpower problem of not having enough to go to the army, as it were. He sought a solution in a large-scale revival of the traditional Roman policy, which had been abandoned in the last 30 years. And that was of settling landless men on the extensive public lands that actually had been acquired by the Roman state during the former conquest of Italy. So there was all this land there, and he thought that perhaps that should be distributed to the poor, to the landless. That's quite revolutionary. That land acquired through the empire. Now, much of this land had fallen irregularly, the article says, but effectively into the hands of the Italian gentry, the wealthy, who had enjoyed use of the land for generations in return for a little tax paid to Rome. So what I am understanding is that the land that the empire was conquering, lo and behold, all of it was little. I don't know the little by little, but it was falling into the hands of the very wealthy and not distributed. Tiberius, with the support of a small but powerful group of senators, primarily of the Claudian, okay, so this is one political faction, side, who shared his concern, but also looked for political advantage from sponsoring such scheme. Okay, we'll help you, we'll vote for that, but what do we gain out of it? Okay. He concocted a bill for the redistribution of the public lands to landless laborers in plots of viable size, the article says. Those who received plots would become their clients, therefore, and provide a political base for power. Okay, so we'll give something to the poor and then they will vote for us, right? Right. Well, that's not news. Okay. What was news lay in the scale of the scheme, which was not limited to a defined area of land or a number of persons, and in the institution of a permanent executive of land commissioners, overseeing what was happening, Congress checking on it, a committee as it were. Opposition from vested interest against this policy was certain. They knew that it would be a difficult law to pass, yeah. But Tiberius hoped to pacify the wealthy, as it were, by a generous provision allowing the great occupiers of public land to retain large portions of it in private ownership, and also perhaps to reduce their taxes. All right, so to implement this measure, Tiberius secured the legislative office of tribune, which was not an essential part of a senatorial career. Tribunes at this period normally legislated in the People's Assembly on the advice of the Senate. But more than once in recent years, tribunes had passed reformist measures without senatorial approval. In other words, the House of Representatives passing legislation without being approved by the Senate. Okay, this is getting difficult. Yes, the Scipio was fighting in Spain at the time, and Tiberius in 133. So one of the leaders of, let's say, one of the political parties, one of the political families was abroad doing other things, and Tiberius in 133 had the support of the sole consul of Rome, who had helped to draft the agrarian bill, and of several other leading senators, mostly of the Claudian faction, whose authority could be expected to deflate opposition, while hordes of peasants flocked to Rome to use their votes in order to vote. When, after a lengthy public debate, the bill was presented to the voters, the tribune Octavius at the time used his right of veto to stop the proceedings of the vote in the interest of the gentry. In other words, the vote was going to be overwhelming by the people in favor of it, and one of the senators, using his right of veto, stopped the voting. In law, that should have been the end of the affair. But Tiberius, convinced of the necessity of the bill, devised a novel method of bypassing the veto. A vote of the assembly of the House, he promoted that a vote of the House would remove Octavius, this senator, from the office, and that was contrary to all precedent. So he was willing, and he wanted the bill to pass, and so he was doing all kinds of things, some legal, some perhaps illegal. That was not the precedent. Okay, so then the bill was passed. But this act obviously brought him many enemies, even within his own party. And those who had approved of the bill, his Tiberius supporters, saw that really the proper authority had been undermined. He had done something that was not legal within the procedures. They rejected the unfamiliar justification devised by Tiberius that tribunes, the representatives, who resisted the will of the people, ceased to be tribunes. Oh my goodness, he was getting into trouble here. If you're not, you have been elected by the people. If you do not do what the people want, then you should cease, you should resign. You should cease to be representatives, tribunes. Okay, the article continues. Fresh complications arose from the lack of financial provision in the agrarian law for the equipment of the new landowners. In other words, that little reduction of the reduction of taxes that had been promised to them if they agreed, that had not materialized. Tiberius expected the Senate to make the traditional allocation of funds, but Scipio now, Scipio Nasica, that is an elderly senator from the Scipio faction, succeeded in limiting these funds, limiting it to a very considerable extent. They agreed to give the tax reduction to the wealthy in exchange for these lands, but the reduction had been sort of 0.0001% kind of thing, nothing, a few pennies. So everyone was dissatisfied at this moment. Then, because they were all, he saw that the whole thing was going to be undermined. Then he thought of another strategy, which was also dangerous, a dangerous proposal. And this was what happened. The king of Pergamon, a city in Anatolia, it's today the Asian part of Turkey. On his death, that king, in 134, had bequeathed his fortune and his kingdom to the Roman state. So Tiberius thought, okay, I'm going to use these monies in order to pay these aristocrats, these wealthy landowners, so I can pass my bill to give their land to the poor. This is what the article says. Tiberius, by a fresh bill, claimed these monies in the name of the people and assigned them to the land commissioners, thus interfering with the Senate's traditional control of public finance and foreign affairs. In other words, okay, you won't give them the tax reduction promised to them so that their lands could be given to the landless peasants. So this is what I'm going to do with these funds that we have just inherited and came from us from heaven. Now, the storm over Tiberius' methods continued to rage. He was threatened with prosecution after the end of his office term, his tribunate, the end of his office in the house. when he would have no formal means of protecting his law and would be liable for prosecution before the Centuriate Assembly. Impeachment or something like that. Okay, liable for prosecution, in which the wealthier classes had a voting advantage. Yeah. Now, not terribly sure of himself and lacking the self-assurance to realize that the people were unlikely either to repeal the agrarian law or to pass sentence against its champion, Tiberius sought refuge in perhaps another impropriety. He proposed to stand for election for a second tribunate, a second term, in 132, although at that time re-election had not been practiced for 300 years and was widely believed to have been barred by an ambiguous statute. So he really wants this bill to pass, and he's doing all kinds of things, and he's upsetting everybody. All right. In the Senate, the embittered opposition tried to induce another consul to stop the elections by force. The leader replied evasively that he would see that nothing illegal was done. Okay. Meanwhile, in the assembly, Tiberius and the other tribunes were at loggerheads over the conduct of the election. A vote by the people had shown that Tiberius was going to win. It had shown that the success of Tiberius was assured if only the election could be completed, but it was aborted. In other words, the people were voting. It was almost certain that he was going to win, and then the voting stopped and it was aborted, it says. So, seizing sticks and staves, they therefore precipitated a riot. It may well have begun as an attempt to disperse the electoral meeting, but it ended with the clubbing and to death of Tiberius and the indiscriminate killing of some scores of citizens. So, in other words, Tiberius was not a saint. After presentation of the agrarian bill, he failed to act prudently with his senatorial supporters, and he added to his troubles by, dubious initiatives that were bound to offend the bulk of the senatorial opinion. And the Senate abandoned him. The Senate recommended that the Land Commission continue, and though in 132 BC it set up a political court that punished many of the lesser followers of Tiberius. So now they're going for his supporters. The article concludes with this. The tribunate of Tiberius Gracchus marked the beginning of the Roman Revolution. With the disappearance of the traditional respect for mos maiorum, the system of compromise between two factions, restraint, not over abuse of your powers on both sides, that restraint handed down from the past. What started then as a norm was legal chicanery and outright murder, and that became then the standard. So the days of the Roman Republic were numbered. What do you think? We just go round in circles, don't we? Anyway, thank you for listening. Bye-bye. Please subscribe.